Can conservation lead to economic growth? Some say no because it prevents development. But a new study published in the journal Conservation Biology shows that conservation has led to job growth in New England. Carolee McGrath sat down with Katharine Sims, a professor of economics at Amherst College, and conservationist Spencer Meyer, who co-authored the study, to learn more.
We were interested in how land protection has influenced local economies around New England in the past 30 years or so. Over that time frame, New England has seen a substantial increase in land protection. More than 5 million acres of land have been protected since 1990 by public and private actors across the region. And given this large jump in land protection, we wanted to understand what might this mean for the local towns and cities that are most directly affected by this land protection.
And a lot of people would say, wait, if you're going to be protecting land, how are you going to be adding jobs to the area, right?
Sure. There are various ways that land protection might add jobs. So one is through increases in direct spending from recreation and tourism opportunities. Another is through amenity-driven growth. Land protection might make communities very attractive places to live and work and attract new businesses. It could also increase jobs through sustainable use of renewable natural resources, so increased timber harvests or other sustained resource use.
And even in some of the more urban areas, when businesses are trying to attract employees are coming and seeking out the communities that have this higher quality of life, which tend to be communities with a lot of open space, recreational opportunities, really desirable communities.
And when you're talking about conservation land, you're talking about both publicly owned land and also private as well, correct?
Yes, so over the last 25 years, 80% of all the land that's been protected has been protected by private landowners in conjunction with local land trusts and other conservation groups. So we have a lot of, town-owned properties, community forests, state-owned lands, and of course a little bit of federal land. But predominantly we're talking about individual landowners who are voluntarily protecting their land in working with their local land trusts.
And so when you did the study and you looked at all of these different towns, what were you hearing from people, as you were interviewing people or, talking to different, store owners? What were you hearing from them?
Sure. So our study actually took a broad look at the region as a whole. So we looked at data over 25 years from 1990 to 2015 from all of the 1,500 towns and cities across New England. And what that meant was that we used data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Census Bureau on employment numbers and new housing permits. So this was really a data-driven study where we were trying to look at the broad patterns. And what we did was to look at how these indicators responded to changes in land conservation within a town or city. And what we found was that when land protection increased within a town or city, the number of people employed responded positively over the next 5-year period. And we found no change in the number of housing permits, suggesting that this is compatible both with employment gains and with no change in the housing stock.
While this study is very data-driven, when we tell the results to people in the land trust and conservation community, they often aren't surprised. They tell us, oh, we knew that already. Yeah. But part of our job as scientists is to get the data and make sure what we think is happening is really happening. And so the conservationists and land trust community tell us they hear stories all the time in their communities about how they're helping create these more desirable communities. They're helping create local recreational opportunities, everything from a place to walk your dog to a place to cross-country ski or mountain bike or just go get out in nature. And so they hear this all the time from their constituents in town.
And let me add to that just a little bit that, there's many factors that could influence economic growth. So one of the things that we were really concerned with was how could we isolate the impacts of land protection from those other factors? So we tried to be as careful as we could by using data over time for each town or city, by assessing the response of employment indicators to land protection in the previous period, and by controlling for other potentially confounding factors. So those might include things like regional growth within a metro region. So we allowed for there to be different trends for, let's say, the Boston region versus the Hartford region. We also controlled for fluctuations in each time period. So we've gone through several recessions and expansions over this time period. So we tried to put in time controls for that. And we controlled for protection by neighbors surrounding towns in case there's clustering of conservation. We also controlled for each town or city using what's called a fixed effect, which allows us to take into account the specific factors that might be unique to each town or city. Is it on the coast? Is it close to a major urban area? things like that.
Okay.
And the reason the approach Kate just laid out is so important and what makes this study novel is that it's not just a correlation of towns with more conservation have more jobs. We can actually say this is causal. We're saying that when towns protect more land, it leads to additional job growth in future years.
And a lot of people would be like, that's incredible, because it would seem like it would impede job growth, excuse me, and that, you know, you would be turning businesses away and you know, telling people this is not the place where you want to set up shop. Yeah. But really, you're finding something that contradicts that.
Yeah, that's right. And it goes to the fact that this underappreciated open space and natural resources, how much more they provide in our communities. So it's not just the recreational opportunities. It's also improving water quality. It's also improving air quality for people's health and creating public health benefits. But it's also providing opportunities for people who have land-based or natural resource-based jobs to have additional jobs.
And tell us a little bit about property values too. I'm sorry.
Sure.
That must be a big part of this equation.
Yes, I think there's lots of prior research showing that property values might go up around open space. And you know, you're absolutely right that there's lots of rhetoric out there about the difficulty of having both environmental protection and economic growth, right? But there are also previous studies from around the country showing similar impacts, particularly in the western part of the United States. We know that our national parks and other protected areas have also led to economic growth. The thing that's different about New England is that instead of having these large federal landowners, we have this whole array of land trusts and private conservation agencies, and it makes New England a really exciting place to study these questions because of this different mix of public and private actors.
One of the arguments that you hear sometimes is that protecting more land reduces the tax rolls. But there's been a number of studies in New England in particular that have showed that the cost of services, so police and fire and schools and other infrastructure, actually are lower in places with more open space because you don't have as many demands on those systems. So for example, for every dollar in tax revenue that open space provides, it only costs about 36 cents in services. Whereas residential development, housing, costs over $1, about $1.15 in services for every dollar it contributes. So we would just say that communities should really think about the whole picture of the cost-benefit analysis when they're evaluating whether to invest more public funding into land conservation.
And have you met with different communities, or will you go and, you know, introduce your study to different communities who might be considering, you know, different development in their towns?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we've begun to do that. There's been a lot of buzz since this study was published, and incidentally, it was published in a journal, Conservation Biology, which is typically reserved for things just like it sounds. And so the fact that this study is really about jobs has generated a lot of buzz. We've received a lot of requests from individual towns, and we're now working on figuring out how can we serve and go speak with those towns.